understanding opacity, brush density, and gap is critical to understanding how to create good brushes in Clip Studio Paint. To understand how these work, let's first look at this stroke here, and then I'm going to increase the gap size until we see actual circles showing up. Adjusting the gap until we see these circles helps us understand what's actually happening while we're painting. If I go to the brush tip, we see that currently I have the tip shape as circle, but it could just as easily be material. So as I paint across the screen, the program lays down dabs. Each one of these individual spots is considered a dab. So now I want to kind of define three terms. One is the dab, which is the individual spot. A stroke we'll talk about as being one swipe of my pen across an area of the screen. And then a touch we will think of as the pen being down, and I may be going back and forth in multiple strokes, but the touch ends when I lift my pen up. Okay, so let's try to understand things. Right now I've turned off the gap, basically set it to very narrow. I've also set the brush density all the way up to 100 and turned off pen pressure. And so I want to focus first on opacity. Notice that right now it's set to 100 with no pen pressure, and we see that the stroke is a solid, smooth stroke. So as we think about opacity, opacity is considered the amount of paint that's laid down in a single touch. Now, some programs may call it a stroke, but it's really a touch. So as I've moved it down to around 50%, notice I will press my pen down and I start to move around. I haven't lifted my pen up, and as I come back and forth, notice that the ink color does not build up. So really I've just kept my pen down in this one touch, and it limits the amount of paint that's laid down. Now if I lift up the pen and then press down again to create another touch, we can see that we do add more color to the drawing. I will lift up again and press down, and we see that opacity is really controlling the amount of ink laid down on a particular touch. Not a dab, not a stroke, but the entire touch. And furthermore, opacity is the maximum amount of ink laid down in a touch. That's important to understand because you actually may want to combine opacity, limited opacity, and brush density to build up paint over time. So now I'm going to turn up opacity all the way, and now we're going to talk about brush density. In other programs, brush density is referred to as flow. Brush density controls the amount of paint laid down in each particular dab. So now I've turned down the brush density all the way down. I'll explain that in a minute. And I've got opacity all the way up. Notice that the stroke looks very light, and as I do a single touch and I go back and forth, I'm able to build up color in just one touch. But if I move over to the side, you see it's very light, and until I just keep going back and forth to build up that color. That's why density is very often the thing that you want instead of opacity. Now let's show this point a little bit more. Now I'm going to drop down opacity. The stroke seems lighter. But notice with a single touch, I'm going to go back and forth and build up the color, but I reach a limit. So the opacity is limiting the maximum color I can lay down, but the brush density is controlling how much I lay down for each individual stroke of that touch. Or more precisely, each individual dab. And I'll show you why the dabs affect the stroke as we talk about gap and adjust brush density by gap. So the gap basically controls how frequently a dab is put down. And you can see, notice this drawing here, and on the top, when these dabs are far apart, they don't overlap. But as they move closer together, they start to overlap, and the color appears to be darker. Essentially, what's happening is that each individual dab is contributing some paint, and so when I have two of them that overlap, we contribute twice as much paint. Now, if you pay very close attention, you may see that there's really kind of a double accumulation of paint. One is for each dab, and then as they kind of overlap, we start accumulating more paint as I'm going in a single stroke. But if I come back and do another stroke on a single touch, I accumulate paint even faster. That may not actually be a desirable effect, and that's what this adjust brush density by gap is. So I'll explain that a little bit more. So to see this more easily, I've filled the background with a red color, and I have a second layer on top that I'm going to paint with a yellow color. I'm going to set the gap to wide, and as I paint here with the density down low, notice that you see this kind of banding, and that's because the different dabs are being put down. So you typically don't want that. You want it to look like a nice smooth stroke. And so I'm going to go to the narrow setting, and notice as I do that, and pay attention that I don't have pen pressure turned on, but the strokes one looks light and one looks dark. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, but this time I'm going to click Adjust Brush Density by Gap. So here let's go to the wide gap and then the narrow gap. And notice that the opacity or density looks the same. So when you're working with brushes, it's probably a very good idea to have the opacity and brush density showing up in the tool properties. So you want to show both the brush density and the adjust brush density by gap. Now we've already talked about gap just in the illustrations, but just to show you what these controls are, we have narrow, normal, and wide. They're just default spacings. And then this first one, the single one, just has a slider that allows you to control that spacing just by sliding the slider. Now, one final thing to point out, when I have brush density down low, notice I can build up that paint, and then I think I could come over here and try to shade and blend, but you'll notice that you kind of get this streaking, so it is a little bit of a difficulty. So that's when you can throw in some opacity, but also you're going to really need to understand some things about hardness and brush angle, and then the ink, the color mixing. So those are some things you'll look at in other videos.